Hey guys, it's Canadian Kyle here at the Wealth Holders Podcast, and today I'm joined with Tim Johnston. He's the co-founder and executive chairman of Li-Cycle, a private company soon to be public on the New York Stock Exchange. They're on a mission to have a more efficient way of recycling lithium-ion batteries. So, Tim, how are you?
Very well, Kyle. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time out of your day to join me. And I really like starting off the podcast, getting to know who you were, who is the man I'm sitting in front of, and what their company is all about. So, first, who you are. And I think the best way is asking where you grew up and what did you do for fun?
So I'm actually Australian. So I grew up in Brisbane, Australia. So I grew up, and this comes back to what I love to do for fun, spending time at the beach and hanging out in the sun. Something that is, somewhat lacking in Ontario and the northeast of the United States. And so at the moment, coming out of winter, this is the happy time of year for me.
What drove you to Canada?
So originally, I moved to the United States. I was here with a management consulting company, an engineering company that I was working for. We were opening a new office in New York, and ultimately ended up moving to Canada as part of a couple of different business ventures as I left Hatch, which was that organization, primarily to start Lifecycle, which is the company we're here to talk about today.
Perfect. And what are your thoughts on Canada? How does it stack up to Australia?
Look, look, I love Canada. I know there's probably somebody out there who's listening to your podcast who surfs in 10-degree water or whatever it is off the East Coast. But no, it's a great country. We love the inclusiveness of it. I've been here for 4 years now, and very much feel part of the landscape.
Yeah, get in to experience those winters.
Yeah, I'm adjusting bit by bit.
So a question I like asking my guests, Tim, is what they were doing when they were my age. So I'm 25. So what were you doing from 20 to 25?
From 20 to 25, I was learning. I mean, I had graduated. I studied mechanical engineering in Australia, and basically, I graduated when I was 21, going on 22, and came into the industry right at the basically almost at the peak of what we consider the first major mining boom of the 2000s, around 2006, 2007. And so around that time, I really decided that I had this technical background, but I really didn't really know very much, right? You come into it with some technical understanding, and so I was working a lot. I was traveling a lot. I was working all over the world, just trying to pick up as much experience as I can. I was adamant that if I could spend that first 5 years of my career learning as much as I could, then I would come out of the back of it with more options than if I just simply, did the bare minimum to get through.
Hmm. Yeah, of course. I never stop learning. I bet you're still
No,
learning.
every day.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on the extractive industries in general?
So you mean in terms of just mining
Like,
extraction
yeah,
overall?
everything we
Yeah,
have, it's either grown or mined. So I just want to
correct.
get your opinion and how you view the extractive industries.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's in every part of our daily life. A lot of people, particularly I feel in the last decade, there's been more and more anti-mining sentiment. And look, we run a recycling company, but by no means are we anti-mining. It's all about trying to do things the best possible way. So for the extractive industries, I think that it's important to recognize that they're essential. Just like we have, using this word essential workers now the last 12 months or so, these industries are essential to supporting everyday life, to be able to provide us
Yep.
with the things that keep us having a high quality of life. And so, what we just have to do is how we manage it. We have to do it the best we possibly can, but, absolutely essential.
And what drove you to the battery space? How did you get started in this space?
Yeah, excellent question. I mean, I started off, one of the very early pieces of advice that I got was to be a good generalist, but to know a lot about something. And 2008, 2009, I'd been doing a lot of work in electrometallurgy, and I was invited to be the engineering manager for a battery project as part of a lithium carbonate plant that was being built in China, and saw that as a great link in, and was very much inspired by the CEO. His name was Iggy Tan, company called Galaxy Resources. He'd raised a lot of money. We, as Hatch, this is my previous company, were building the first fully continuous lithium carbonate plant that had ever been built in the world. It was really at the pinnacle and the start of what was going to be this revolutionary change. And he was a visionary, still is a visionary. And what I see is that he inspired me to go, wow, this is actually going to be huge.
Hmm.
So at that point in time, I decided that everything else went on hold, and this is all I wanted to do. This is all I wanted to know about. And so you're both from a professional perspective, and we started a technology practice focused on lithium and lithium related projects. I did everything I could to learn about the industry. I then went on to business and other studies to help support that. But that was really a very pinnacle point in my life.
Very cool. So let's talk about the industry then. What is the current battery recycling industry like today?
Yeah, I mean, batteries have been viewed for a long time as waste, right? Like just like lots of things that come out of use. We talk about extractive, and for some components, there has always been a good second life or recycling mentality. Some of them have developed over time, and steel's a classic example of this, where we saw, what was quoted back in the 2000s of the tsunami of scrap steel that was coming out of China, that were associated with all the production that had been going on. For batteries, this has grown from a very small level scale, and it's continued to build over and over in time. But for a long time, it was just viewed as waste. And what happens to waste? Well, a lot of waste, particularly waste that you can't put into a landfill. And of course, we've seen the videos of batteries catching fire and doing these sorts of things, which are problematic in a landfill scenario. You have to come up with some way to neutralize it. And so basically, what people have been doing is incinerating the batteries. So they basically put it into some form of high temperature processing where they're burning off like plastics and
Wow.
electrolyte and these sorts of components, and then basically chasing whatever residual metal content is left at the back end in order to try and recover some value. So that's how batteries are being viewed. And for me, after having spent almost 15 years developing, building lithium assets around the world, and seeing our clients literally spend billions of dollars going after to develop assets, extractive assets, that we're going to produce these materials to go into the battery, just to see it end up going into that sort of process at the end of the life of the battery seemed extremely inefficient. We were losing so much of the valuable components because, once again, it was a factor of that it was early, there wasn't big volume, but people kind of missed the point that there was going to be this real big need, and hence why we got into it quite early.
And you are quite early. Like, why don't you explain? Before we get into life cycle, actually, let's go to your co-founder because you're a co-founder. Who
Hmm.
else was the person that helped found this company?
Yeah, he's our CEO, RJ Kocha. So RJ is also a fellow engineer. So we were working together, once again, working for clients in the battery industry. And we were, I think the greatest innovations come out of a need. And one of the benefits of working in any industry is it gives you the opportunity, if you are observant enough, to identify needs, gaps that are missing in the marketplace. And so he and I were both convinced that there was this clear gap, that there was no way that we were going to have this revolution in terms of transformation in how we use energy today if there wasn't a good solution to how to handle the waste. And so after working together for a number of years, we both left the firm that we were in at Hatch, and basically went into business together
Nice.
as two relatively inexperienced business guys. He at least came from a business background. He has two entrepreneurial parents that run their own business, and have been fantastic mentors and guides to us as we've been building this business. And basically, that was it. We were both two young engineers, and but saw the need.
Nice. So you're talking about changing the industry and you touched on incinerating, but you guys aren't incinerating. So go ahead and explain what Life Cycle is doing.
Yeah, so Lifecycle is a resource recovery company, and that's how we see it. We have a patented technology that is focused on two parts. The first part is all about where batteries are received in. So we process any format of lithium-ion battery, from the smallest lithium-ion battery that you can imagine, all the way up to and including electric vehicle batteries and other large format batteries. And then we process them through into intermediate products. In the mining world, this is much like a concentrator. Basically, what we're doing is we're separating the high value components, which is what we call black mass. That's just the industry term that refers to things like the nickel, the cobalt, the lithium, graphite. They all exist within the black mass. And then we're separating out another stream of plastic and then metallic foils. And the plastics then go on to secondary processes, as does the metallic foils. But the key thing that we're after is that black mass component. Now, what's neat about the process that Lifecycle created is that, coming back to the fundamental principles of what we wanted to do, is we identified a way to basically break down those batteries safely in any charge state to produce these materials using no thermal processes. So it's purely mechanical. It's all solution based. We don't discharge any wastewater. We recycle 100% of the water within the plant. And we don't generate any meaningful air emissions because we're not incinerating any of the components of the battery as we're breaking them up. And so this was a big step change. But not only was it a step change environmentally, but it really changed the cost structure, because previously, if you think about it, going through a high temperature process is highly energy intensive, costs a lot of money. What we'd worked out was how to actually bring that cost down, but do it in a sustainable way. So it was both economically sustainable and environmentally sustainable. So
So
that's sort
how,
of like the first. Sorry, you go. Go on.
I was going to say, are you focused on all kinds of batteries then, consumables and vehicle? Like, how do you get your supply?
Yeah, so on the front end, I mean, we have master service contracts with over 40 suppliers, automotive, EVs, aggregators. We define it as three broad segments: aggregators of consumer style batteries. So everything from cell phone batteries, laptop batteries, all those sorts of different sort of small format. If you've ever dropped a battery off at like a Home Depot, for example, a drill battery, that goes all through to these aggregators. And what they're doing is they then produce a stream of lithium ion batteries. And so they come to us. So we work with all the major ones here in North America.
Hmm.
Then you go to the next segment, which is electric vehicles. And electric vehicles has two key parts. One is the manufacturing scrap. When you make anything, doesn't matter what it is, it could be a ballpoint pen, it could be a notepad, or it could be a lithium ion battery. You have certain waste materials that come out of that manufacturing process. No process is 100% efficient from that perspective. And so we get that manufacturing scrap and we process that, as well as servicing end of life batteries. And that might be things like in warranty replacements, or it could be vehicles that have been in accidents, or it just might be, now we're starting to see vehicles that have actually truly reached the end of their life, they're worn out and they're being scrapped. And so we'll take all those battery feeds in. And then the final category is energy storage. And so this is things like, so you might have a solar farm, for example.
Oh,
It
wow.
has a it has like a grid battery storage system, and it has to be replaced every 10 years or thereabouts, depending on the duty cycle. And so when they replace it, they need somewhere to send those batteries. And so we take those batteries and we'll process those batteries for energy storage companies.
10
So the
years.
full spectrum. Yeah, it could be longer, it could be shorter. I mean, it really depends on the duty cycle. I mean, your phone battery only lasts for a couple of years because you're using it so intensely. Whereas if you have a battery that's, if it's only being used for backup and it's only being discharged and charged, every few months, well, then it's going to last a lot longer. And so it just depends on where it falls in that regime, basically.
A little off the topic, but just because
Yeah.
you're in this space, what about the length of these electric vehicles? Like you now you're experiencing Canadian winters. Like what are your thoughts
Yeah.
there?
Yeah, I mean, look, I drive a Model Y,
Oh yeah.
and I love it. And we have plants in Kingston, Ontario, and Rochester, New York. So I'm quite regularly, and I live in Toronto, so I'm quite regularly, almost every week driving around Lake Ontario,
Hmm.
and it does a fantastic job. I mean, one of the benefits is definitely on the infrastructure side for Tesla. I find that having the charging network is extremely helpful. You definitely see a detrimental impact associated with the weather and the cold.
Hmm.
Definitely makes it a lot harder. I'm probably not super easy on the vehicle either. I know other people will like run it at like, they might run the car at 12 degrees Celsius inside and, keep the seat warmers off and everything. Whereas my Canadian blood, I'm sort of, I mean, Australian blood,
Yeah.
it's, 20 degrees Celsius and but the seat warmers on and
Yeah.
the stereo is on. So I'm not the easiest user, but I still don't find it. It doesn't materially impact my trips at all. And I mean, I had before this, I had a Model 3. I put 40,000 kilometers on that vehicle in 1 year. And so definitely getting a lot of use out of it. We actually have a program within the company where each plant manager gets an electric vehicle. And
Very cool.
in part because we want them to experience it and understand the technology as it's being developed. And so it gives us an opportunity to drive different vehicles and test them out. My Model Y is probably my favorite so far. I love my Model 3. I'll probably go to a Model S next, but we'll see what happens.
Or the Roadster.
Yeah. Yeah.
So back to light cycle, you have the spoke and the hub
Yes,
process, right?
correct.
The spoke is where the metal. What do you
That's
do with that then? You don't further refine the copper and the aluminum, right? You just ship it out.
correct. So from the spoke side of it, so we produce those three key products: the plastics, the metallic foils, and the black mass. Plastics go to a downstream processor. That metal product also goes to a downstream processor. So we get paid for the copper and precious metal content. Because
Okay.
of course we're processing, battery packs and modules, BMS and everything included. So there's some precious metals that come through there. So we're quite often running, you're in gold country where you're sitting today. We're quite often running, 10 grams per ton of gold in that metallic foil, for example. So it's a high value
Cool.
product.
Wow.
And then the black mass is the key thing we're after. And that's where the hub piece of it comes into. So today we sell the black mass. We have great customers. We basically feed that into, coming back to the mining world, it goes in alongside mineral concentrates as a secondary feed, basically to boost grade, because the concentration of metals in that material relative to concentrates produced by the earth is significantly higher. Particularly if you're trying to balance things like nickel to cobalt, or you're chasing very high nickel or very high cobalt, it's a really good product from that perspective. But that's not our vision. Our vision has always been to take batteries in and produce chemicals back. So Q3 last year, we announced that we're building our first hub. And this comes back to the business model of the spoke and hubs. Spokes are bifurcated close to where battery sources are, much like how you want a concentrator close to where your ore body is. You then are able to put that close to where batteries are being produced. Small footprint, low capex, low environmental footprint, easy to permit. Producing high value intermediate product, black mass, moving into a central facility, the hub, which benefits from economies of scale. And then we turn that black mass back into materials. We go directly back to the battery industry. So once again, no high temperature processing. We come from the mining industry. When we looked at what's in black mass, for us, it doesn't make sense to treat it thermally. The reality is that, without getting too technical, they're all oxides in black mass, which just means that if that was existing in the Earth's crust today as a metallurgical consultant, I would never recommend putting it into a smelter. It would just go directly to a refining circuit. And so we basically dissolve those metals into solution, recover the graphite, and then we go through and sequentially remove the individual metals. And we're producing battery grade lithium carbonate, cobalt sulfate, nickel sulfate, manganese carbonate, a whole range of different materials that can then go directly back to the industry. And the key benefit then for the life cycle is, not only are we able to close the loop with the customers who are actually providing us the batteries, but now we're also able to extract so much more value, because in the traditional mineral processing processes, they're burning off so much of the other materials. They can't recover the lithium, the
Hmm.
graphite, really recovering components of the nickel and cobalt. And so now we can recover all those key ones and produce them in the right form for the battery industry. So we go directly to sulfates without having to go via metal, for example. That's enabled us to really ramp up those economics and extract maximum value out of that material.
So with this black mass, what is Li-Cycle's vision with it? Because if, okay, let's say the price of nickel, the price of cobalt shoot up, but the price of manganese stays the same. Are you just going to focus on the economically feasible materials, or how does it work?
No, no. I mean, the benefit of this is that because it's like almost like a portfolio effect, right? So we understand that there's going to be ups and downs, but this is now a refinery with no tailings, right? Because we don't produce any waste, right? Zero liquid discharge. And so even if nickel and cobalt go up, the reality is we have to remove the manganese from the nickel and cobalt to make the nickel and cobalt saleable anyway. So we're going to turn it into a product. And so we're going to sell that as a product. And that's a great input for other batteries, fertilizers, whole range of different, commodity spaces that can use this material. So we're always going to have that need to remove those materials. We just get to benefit from the economic upside of those individual metals alongside it.
Okay, okay, that makes sense. And is it what happens if you're talking to a guy that isn't in the battery industry? So
That's cool.
they talk about
I
the
love it.
battery industry being always changing, and you don't know what the compounds are
Yeah,
going to be.
yeah,
Will Li-Cycle be adaptive with those if they were to change?
yeah, for sure. I mean, we've always had to maintain a nimble approach, and we deliberately designed the processes to be able to handle the full spectrum of batteries. So one other thing that you might see is companies that are going after one stream of lithium-ion batteries. I'll give you an example: LCO, very high cobalt, highest cobalt cathode material on the market today.
Okay.
And so they'll go just after that stream. But that reduces the potential market so significantly. But now you also have to sort it, right? We don't sort on the front end. And so because they have to sort it, they're adding additional layer of cost and complexity to the front end of the process, which makes them uneconomic to then handle all the other materials. And so from our perspective, we're like, we'll take everything. We've designed the process to be able to handle swings in nickel and cobalt and other metals. Lithium is actually relatively stable across all the chemistries, with the exception of LFP. That's the only one that's a little bit different. But the rest of it is quite variable. And as long as you design for that and you know that up front, you can manage it. And that's what we've done.
Okay. Yeah, for sure. And what do you have currently established for facilities?
So we have a spoke in Kingston, Ontario. So 5,000 ton per year facility there. We have another one in Rochester, New York. Uh, and then we have the upcoming hub in Rochester, New York, and we're also about to announce a fourth spoke in the United States as well. So at the moment, we have the ability to process about 10,000 tons per year of lithium-ion batteries. That'll be closer to 20,000 tons by the end of this year, and then growing from that base.
Nice. And what's the competition like in this space right now currently? Because I saw one other company claiming they could extract 95% as well.
Yeah, so I mean, the reality is there's lots of companies now looking at this space. When RJ and I started the company, 2016, to be frank, lots of our industry peers told us we were way too early. They're like, this is a problem for 5, 10 years, guys. Like, this is not a problem for today. But we know how long it takes to develop this technology. And by that point, we also established that if we're early, we can get a very strong intellectual property moat around the business. So we've been able to establish a very, very strong IP moat. And so now what we see is lots of people are looking at it. Lots of people are identifying the opportunity associated with it. There's still many of them are still very early stage. Our biggest competitor, to be honest, in North America, is still brokers who would seek to export the material to places like Korea, for example, where they can sell the batteries into the market there. Ironically, most of that material then ends up back in North America. So from an economic perspective, that's very difficult for them to compete. And so what we've seen over as we've grown our capacity, processing capacity, we've been able to grow our market share. And we see that continuing over the next number of years.
For sure. Yeah, you started this 5 years ago, was it? This company?
Yeah. About 5 years ago it was. Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you see for the next 5 years? What are your plans?
It's going to be busy. And so, I mean, we designed the spokes in a way so it's full modular construction. So we build them and test them in Canada and then ship them. Give you an example, the Rochester one took 4 weeks to install from time of receiving the modules to time of starting of operation. Now, what that's enabled us to do from a business plan going forward is we actually have plans to build 18 more of these spokes around the world in the next 5 years and 4 hubs. We have one hub already in late stage development, which is the one in Rochester. We have 3 more planned. So it's going to be a busy build out over the next 5 years. But we see that being a very important part of our overall strategy because we've done the work and now we're ready to go. We're actually positioned lockstep to move with the auto industry in particular, which is the fastest growing sector for lithium-ion batteries today, and be able to support them with the infrastructure that they need for both their manufacturing scrap, but also being able to demonstrate that there's something there somewhere for these batteries to go once the vehicle has reached its useful life.
And you're not just targeting North America, right? What I'm interested in is you're looking at Asia too. So you want to talk about your global expansion
Yeah,
strategy?
absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. So we basically have got 3 different segments. We have the North American strategy, which is to build out the spokes and the hub that I've just talked about. We then have plans to build additional spoke capacity throughout Europe, and then we'll have news out on that shortly. The Asian strategy is probably the most interesting. So, one of the core parts of Life Cycle's technology is our ability to process LFP batteries, which are just lithium iron phosphate. Why that's important is because that was one of the very earliest segments. It's still about 30% of the overall lithium battery market today.
Okay.
But the issue for the traditional recyclers is it doesn't contain any nickel and cobalt. So going back to my initial premise where people were sending black mass to traditional mining related assets, they're specifically targeting the nickel and cobalt. So without those components, this material has no value for them. And we've seen examples of that material just being stockpiled in China. So our China strategy is specifically around targeting LFP chemistry because our technology has enabled us not just to economically extract the nickel and the cobalt, but also the lithium and produce that back into a battery grade material. So that's what I would say is a region specific strategy where we're going in after that in a high intensity. LFP batteries are also associated with lower cost batteries, and so there's many more examples of their application in China and other parts of Asia.
You said LFP is 30%. I haven't even heard of these batteries before, but they got rid of the nickel in the batteries?
Yeah, so it was actually one of the very first chemistries. So the very first chemistry was LCO, and then we had LFP and LMO. And then we moved into the tertiary chemistries like NMC, for example,
Mm-hmm.
NCA. But LFP was always there. It has a lower energy density than the tertiary chemistries, and so for applications in vehicles and things, it means lower range. But from a cost perspective, it's significantly cheaper without having those high cost metals in them. If you look back and you can see, even in the last 12 months, BYD, Tesla, they've all made and most recently Volkswagen have all made announcements around incorporating LFP chemistries into their automobiles. Because when Elon talks about, how do we build a $25,000 car, LFP chemistry is core to making that possible, getting that battery cost down. And so whilst it may not have a 500-mile range, most people don't need a 500-mile range. And they'll be able to accept a lower range for a lower cost vehicle.
Mm.
And now you're going to end up with more bifurcation. In China, there's always been a need for LFP batteries because they're used in things like scooters and trucks and small vehicles that are used for transportation. But they've also been regulatorily pushed into the public transportation sector. So any buses or any public transportation if it's lithium battery powered, it has to be an LFP battery, because an LFP battery is inherently safer than the tertiary chemistries. So it's sort of, you win a bit on safety, you lose a little bit on energy density, but that's been one
And
of the
in
other
these
key drivers.
vehicles, these electric vehicles, like they're huge batteries. Are they, you can just replace them? Like you can keep your car intact and replace them? Or is this kind of promoting like a waste consumer economy? Like, do you end up buying a new car if the battery runs
It's
out?
a really good question. And look, my personal view is that, and if you listen to where it seems the vehicles producers want to go, they're talking about going from cell directly to vehicle. And why that's important is at the moment we go basically cell to module to pack to vehicle. And so if it's in a pack form, yes, you could theoretically replace the pack and keep the vehicle going. If it goes directly into the integration of the vehicle, there's no replacing that battery. Just like there's no real replacing your battery in your phone today, right?
Yeah.
It's concealed within there, and so it will likely lead to, in my view, a rollover effect on vehicles.
Hmm. Interesting.
Mm.
One question I wanted to ask for sure, I didn't want to miss it, is SPACs have become a lot popular in the past year. And with your, why don't you go ahead and talk about what a SPAC is and why you guys chose to
Yeah,
go through SPAC and not the IPO traditional method?
yeah, no worries. So SPAC is a special purpose acquisition corporation, right? So these are entities that are set up. They go out, they raise money with usually very good management who have been in industries for decades or years before that, with the specific goal of going and finding a private company, usually, in order to basically buy that company and take it public to the public market. Uh, where it works really well is with companies that need capital to be able to unlock the full potential of the technology, or whatever it is that that company is doing. So SPACs have become increasingly popular in recent times as a way of bringing pre-revenue or early revenue companies public, because they have the management and the capability to go in and do the work on the company to make that assessment as to whether or not the company is validated enough to be able to justify the capital that is available through the SPAC market, and in exchange for that, bring a public transaction for the shareholders of both the entity but also the SPAC. So what happens in general is you'll have the SPAC. They'll go find. So for example, I'll talk about in our circumstance because it's easier to use an example.
Mm-hmm.
So Peridot Acquisition Corp was set up as a $300 million vehicle. They raised $300 million to go and find a target. It was supported by management who, guys like Alan Levand, who had been through multiple growth companies from concept through to sale, multiple billion-dollar plus companies. And his team, they then went out and they were looking for good quality private companies that were aligned with their mandate. They were going after companies that supported this new energy mandate. This is where Lifecycle comes in. Lifecycle comes in. They see Lifecycle as a leader in the field in which it's working within, that has the potential for extreme growth when supported with capital. And Lifecycle and Peridot agreed to do a transaction. Now, what you want to do is then raise a PIPE alongside of it, which is just a private placement that you basically do alongside the go public transaction. And so, together with Peridot, we go to the market and we seek out additional investment. And so, in Lifecycle's case, we raised an additional $315 million in a PIPE vehicle, which then supports the SPAC. And now, where we're up to is we're now in the process of going through what's called the de-SPACing, which is just basically both parties have signed a definitive agreement to merge, like in any other merger, and we're going through the regulatory approval process to the point where we ultimately become one company, which for Lifecycle is likely the end of May. And so that's the process. they are popular because they have cash, they have that forward-looking capability,
Well, it's a
and
win-win.
that
Yeah.
absolutely, yeah,
Hmm.
100%. Yeah, it's been a great transaction.
For sure. And you don't just have them, you have government backers. One thing, the way I found out about Li-Cycle is that I saw, what are they called? What is it called? The Sustainable Development Technology of Canada issued 55 million to 20 companies that were clean
Mhm.
tech companies. And I saw that Li-Cycle received 4 million from them. So I was curious about that process. How did,
Yeah.
was it like a Shark Tank pitch, or how did you get that?
I don't know if the STTC board would like themselves related to Shark Tank or not, but no. Look, the Canadian government's been really supportive, and the STTC program is great. So what they do is they basically look to come alongside other investors. So STTC is not just a blank check in terms of a grant. You need to bring investment capital from outside the company that helps validate the technology or the process or whatever the company is working on. You then go through what is a pretty extensive review process with the STTC board. It goes through multiple stage gates. Once you get through all that, if you get through all that, then you get a grant. And so we've been very fortunate that we've had great support from STTC from early days. We've had 2 grants approved by them since our inception. And I really see it as a great form of leveraging external capital to help early stage technology companies. And hence why we're really very grateful.
Very cool. Well, we're running low on time here, Tim, so I think it's time for the vault. So the vault won't be available on YouTube, guys. I need the subscriber count up before I start releasing them on YouTube. For now, it's just going to be on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. But yeah, let's get into the vault. So Tim, I like letting the guests close off. So here's your chance for your plugs. Anything you want to mention about Li-Cycle? Anything you want to share with the listeners out there?
Yeah, no, I think this has been really great, Kyle. I think just the key thing from me personally is just if I can encourage anyone, just reach out. I'm on LinkedIn. Look me up. I'm happy to try and respond as best I can, and really want to see more young entrepreneurs get up and give it a go and change this world.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Tim, thanks for taking the time to talk to me.
No, perfect. Thank you, Kyle. Appreciate your time.